There's a particular kind of silence that only exists in big corporate events. Hundreds of people in one room, music fading, glasses clinking, polite conversations dying down as the lights dim and the stage lights come up. It's loud and quiet at the same time, like everyone's pretending this is normal while waiting to see what changes hands next. We were in the main auditorium of our headquarters, a space big enough to host investor days, product launches, and once a company-wide karaoke night someone in HR still refused to talk about. Tonight it was being used for a different kind of announcement. Leadership transition. The new director of enterprise strategy was being introduced to the organization. I stood about 3 rows back from the front aisle seat, badge clipped to my shirt like everyone else. Nothing fancy. Just my name, Karen Verma, and my title, Senior Solutions Architect. No one looking at my badge would know that for the last 9 years, every major enterprise deal this company closed had passed through my hands, that I had personally architected the largest deployments, the ones we showcased in case studies and bragged about on earnings calls, that every time a project was labeled critical, someone eventually added, "Loop in Karen." On the stage, our VP of strategy was warming up the crowd. As many of you know, after 11 years with us, Ananya is moving on to her next chapter, he said. Today, we welcome a new director to lead enterprise strategy into its next phase of growth. Polite applause. I clapped too, not for the new director, for Ananya. She'd been one of the few people in upper management who actually understood what my team did. We ran a global search, he continued. We spoke with dozens of candidates. Ultimately, we found someone with a track record of transformation at scale. That phrase, transformation at scale, made the marketing team positively giddy. They'd already started drafting the blog post. Please join me in welcoming our new director of enterprise strategy, Ms. Lena Arundhati. There she was. Spotlight applause the whole arc. Late 30s, sharp suit, confident walk. The kind of person who knows exactly when the camera is cut to her and how to tilt her chin just so. She walked across the stage, shook hands with the VP, took the microphone. "Thank you," she began. Her voice filled the room effortlessly. "It's an honor to be here. I've followed this company for years, and when the opportunity came to step into this role, it felt like a natural fit." I tuned out the generic part. I'd heard versions of this speech before. New leaders always said the same things. Excited to build on the existing foundation. Inspired by the team's energy. Committed to operational excellence. What mattered wasn't the speech. It was what happened after. There was a reception afterward in the atrium. Catered snacks, clusters of people, executives trying to see and be seen. I didn't plan on talking to her that evening. Honestly, I prefer being invisible at these things. Shake a few hands, nod, then slide out before the small talk eats your soul. But as I stood at a high-top table with a few folks from engineering sipping bad sparkling water, I heard my name. "Karen, you should meet her," our sales VP Vivek said from behind me. "You're going to be joined at the hip whether you like it or not." I turned. He was walking toward me, gesturing for me to follow. "Come on," he insisted. "You're the one who actually understands how these enterprise monsters work. She'll need you." I could have resisted. I didn't. "Fine," I said, setting my glass down. We walked toward the center of the atrium, where the new director was surrounded by a loose circle of people, department heads, a couple of product leads, someone from PR hovering just close enough to catch quotes. "In my last role, we consolidated 3 lines of business into one go-to-market motion," she was saying, laughter around her. "You'd be amazed how much duplication hides in mature organizations." She shook someone's hand, smiled for a photo. Vivek put a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Lena," he said, waiting for a break in her conversation. "Can I steal 10 seconds? Want to introduce someone?" She turned. Her eyes flicked to him, then briefly to me, then to the camera guy, then back. "Of course," she said. "This is Karen," Vivek said. "Senior Solutions Architect, leads most of our complex deployments. If an enterprise logo is on the board, he probably touched it." I extended my hand. "Welcome," I said. "I've heard a lot about your work, looking forward to collaborating." She didn't take my hand. She glanced at my badge. Her eyes narrowed just slightly on the word senior. Then, and later, when I replayed it in my mind, I checked for even a hint of misinterpretation, but it was clear. She smirked, turned her head slightly toward Vivek and said into the circle, loud enough for the microphones nearby to pick up, "Can someone get this junior employee out of my sight?" It landed like a punchline. People laughed, not everyone, but enough. The nervous laugh. The "ha-ha, she's joking, right?" laugh, except she wasn't joking. She had already turned her body away from me as she said it, angling toward the CFO, effectively cutting me out of the circle. Vivek froze. I did not. My hand was still extended. I let it hang there for half a second, then calmly lowered it. I could feel all the micro-reactions around me. The "did she really say that?" The "is he going to react?" The camera lens adjusting because yes, the company had hired a photographer and videographer to document the event. I could have walked away. I could have laughed it off. Instead, something settled in my chest. Not anger, clarity. I straightened my shoulders, looked directly at her profile. She still wasn't looking at me and said in a normal voice that carried just enough, "You just cost this company $1.8 billion. That got her attention. She turned her head back toward me, eyebrows up. "I'm sorry," she said. Her tone wasn't apologetic, it was annoyed, like I'd interrupted a good story. I held her gaze. "I said," I repeated, "you just cost this company $1.8 billion. The circle around us shifted. The laughter died instantly. Someone's phone stopped mid-photo. Vivek looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Lena's smile thinned. "I'm not sure I follow," she said. "But that's a very big number for a very small badge." She emphasized small badge just enough. I didn't look at my badge. I didn't look away. "It'll make sense soon," I said, "but I'm getting ahead of myself." I stepped back. "Congratulations on the role," I added, tone neutral. "I genuinely hope you enjoy the view from the top while it lasts." Then I turned, walked away as calmly as I'd approached and left the circle behind. I didn't go back to the high top. I went home. Because the thing about consequences is simple. If you've done your preparatory work right, you don't have to stay to watch them unfold. They will come find you. If you're listening to this and feeling your chest tighten because you've been there, overlooked, underestimated, treated like furniture at your own company, you're not alone. These stories aren't about fantasy revenge. They're about leverage. The kind you build slowly over years by understanding something most people at your company don't, who actually holds the risk. So if that resonates with you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's rewind. Let me show you how a single moment of public disrespect intersected with an audit trail, a portfolio, and one very specific clause in a set of client contracts to create a $1.8 billion problem for a director who thought badges told her everything she needed to know. I worked for a company called Triscope Dynamics. We were not a household name. Our logo never appeared on billboards. But if you looked at the guts of some of the world's largest retailers, insurers, and logistics networks, you'd see our fingerprint. We built decision engines, real-time optimization systems that told companies which shipment should go on which truck, which claim deserves a second look, which price to show to which user at what time. You know, all those times when you see a price, think, that seems weirdly specific, and then later read about some company's AI-driven personalization. That was our world. My title was Senior Solutions Architect. What that actually meant was, if a client deal was too big, too complicated, or too politically sensitive for the standard implementation team, they assigned it to me. I spoke 3 languages at once, technical with engineering, operational with the client's line managers, financial with their executives, and I specialized in one particular kind of problem, critical migrations. Not the flashy new system launches that get press releases. The messy transitions where a client had to move from one entire way of allocating resources to another without falling on their face in the middle. If they got it wrong, millions of customers would be impacted. If we got it wrong, they'd drop us and tell their friends why. That's where the $1.8 billion came in. But again, I'm getting ahead. Let me explain how that number even existed. 3 years before the handshake incident, we signed the biggest contract in the company's history. A multinational retailer, let's call them Harcum Global, came to us with a problem. They operated in 17 countries, with hundreds of distribution centers and thousands of suppliers. Their legacy planning system was glued together from a mainframe older than most of their managers. a custom layer written in a language half the engineering world had forgotten. Spreadsheet-based overrides that store managers swore were temporary but had been running for 10 years. They were bleeding money in ways their board could no longer ignore, overstock in some regions while others stocked out, wasted transport capacity, penalties for missed delivery windows, customer churn when orders didn't arrive. They wanted to modernize, but there were two constraints. They could not afford a visible failure. They just survived one PR disaster involving a product recall. Another headline about system outage delays orders worldwide could tank their stock. Their regulators, especially in Europe, were already watching them closely for data and fairness issues. Any new system had to satisfy not just performance metrics but compliance obligations. We were one of 4 vendors invited to bid. I led our technical response. The others promised fast timelines and lots of buzzwords. I promised something different, a phased migration. A shadow mode where our system would run alongside theirs for months, proving it made better decisions before anything actually changed. And an explicit commitment, I would personally oversee the architecture end to end. The last part turned out to be more important than I realized at the time, because when the lawyers got involved, they asked a simple question: what happens if this Karen leaves in the middle? Most vendors shrug at that point. We're a team. Knowledge is shared. I didn't shrug. I knew from experience that statement rarely held under pressure. So I sat in a room with our legal team, our CCO and theirs, and we wrote something into the master services agreement most people in my company still hadn't read 3 years later. It said, roughly, for the first 5 years of the contract, Triscope would assign a designated lead architect for Harcum's optimization systems. Any change to that designated role had to be communicated and approved in writing by Harcum's executive sponsor. If Harcum did not approve the replacement, they had the right to freeze further rollout phases and initiate an early termination with reduced penalties if they could demonstrate material risk from the leadership change. You know how most big clients are. They don't care what your internal titles are. They care whether they can call the same person who understands their mess when something weird happens at 2:00 a.m. For Harcum, that person was me. Name him in the contract, their COO said in the final meeting. Otherwise, we're relying on a logo, not a brain. So they did. And I became, in very specific legal language, a key person. Not in our HR system, in the client's system. There is a huge difference. The Harcum project was intense. 2 years of bi-weekly flights between our office and their European HQ, 4-hour workshops where everyone argued about edge cases, late nights tracing why one regional planner always overrode the system on Tuesdays, calculating, recalculating, and documenting every configuration choice. We moved them carefully. First, one region, then 2, then a subset of products. All the while, the old system ran in parallel like a shadow. We compared decisions. We showed their teams not just that we were better, but how. By year 3, we were managing almost all their allocation decisions in 12 countries. The impact was real, 14% reduction in logistics costs in the first fully migrated region. On-time delivery rates up 11 points. Stockouts down double digits in previously struggling markets. Harcum's CEO mentioned our new optimization partnership in an earnings call. Our CEO mentioned our largest ever client win in his. Everyone was happy. Everyone except some of our internal people who weren't thrilled about one thing. The contract said explicitly that any change in lead architect required Harcum's approval, which meant they couldn't just reassign me. They couldn't just promote me away from the account without a negotiation. They couldn't quietly sideline me if someone upstairs decided I wasn't strategic enough. It was a strange kind of security, and it only became controversial when our own internal org structure decided to reorient around leaders with external presence, which is how the incoming director enters the story. By the time our leadership decided to hire a new director of enterprise strategy, the Harcum project was in a delicate phase. We were planning phase 4, tying our optimization system deeper into their forecasting and pricing modules. This phase would increase their dependency on us, increase our revenue per year by a significant amount. increased the regulatory stakes because more decisions would be subject to scrutiny. It was also the phase where Harcum had the most leverage. Their contract allowed them at that point to expand with us or freeze features and begin planning an exit if they didn't like the direction. They liked me. They trusted me. They had built a mental model of Triscope that had my face and name attached. Our leadership, however, had built a different model. Enterprise strategy should be led by someone with a certain resume. I don't begrudge that. My resume didn't say, led global transformation initiatives, spoke on stage at conferences, drove strategic realignment across product lines. It said, got things done, understood the system, made clients sleep at night. Those sound noble. They don't get you glossy slide decks, so they went out and hired Lena. On paper, she was perfect. Graduate of a top-tier business school, consulted for big names, had words like transformation, synergy, and portfolio strategy on her CV in just the right places. The internal story was, she'll own relationships at that level. Architects can support. The problem wasn't having a new director. The problem was the way she chose to establish herself, which brings us back to the handshake. A lot of people asked me later, did you really say that in the moment? Or did you think of it after and wish you had? I said it in the moment. Because what happened in that circle wasn't about a bruised ego. It was about watching someone reveal in 30 seconds how they would treat the people whose work they depended on. If she'd brushed me off privately, I'd have taken note. If she'd made a mildly rude joke, I'd have shrugged. But she looked at my badge, decided from one word that I was beneath her attention, used me as a punchline in front of my peers, while cameras recorded the supposed celebration of leadership. That wasn't a slip, that was a statement. Hierarchy matters more than contribution. People sometimes ask, why didn't you go to HR? Why didn't you file a complaint? The answer is simple. HR can address tone. They cannot rewrite the way an executive sees the world. And in my line of work, how someone sees the world is everything. So instead of trying to fix her attitude, I did what I do best. I looked at the system, and I asked myself, what happens if this person with this mindset becomes the face of our relationship with Harcum? What happens when she walks into their boardroom, looks at their senior engineers and planners with the same smirk, and expects them to fall in line? What happens when she asks me to step aside to make room for her narrative of I came in and fixed things? What happens when she ignores the clause that says my role cannot be changed without their consent? The short version, 1.8 billion happens. The Monday after the event, I had a standing weekly call with Harcum's COO, a man named Jonas. We'd kept it on the calendar even after the crisis stages ended. Half an hour, usually light. Anything weird, anything we should watch. Any political landmines. That morning, he opened with something unusual. I saw your new director on LinkedIn, he said. She looks polished. I smiled. Her CV is impressive, I replied. That's not what I asked, he said. He knew me too well. Do you trust her, he asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the handshake, the smirk, the sentence. Someone get this junior employee out of my sight. I thought about how many times he had watched me stay calm when his own people got heated. I thought about the contract clause. I don't know yet, I said carefully. We haven't worked together in real conditions, he grunted. Well, at some point they're going to parade her in here, he said. You know that, they'll want her to own the relationship. Yes, I agreed. Do me a favor, he added. When that happens, listen more than you talk. I trust your read. We moved on to technical topics. But that line stuck with me. I trust your read. My company hired me for my technical skill. Harcum paid us for my judgment. Those are not the same thing. The first time Lena tried to own the Harcum relationship, it was a disaster in slow motion. We flew to their HQ for what was billed as a Phase 4 vision workshop. In attendance, their COO Jonas, their head of logistics, their chief data officer, their compliance lead, a few regional operations heads. From our side, our CEO, Lena, me, and 2 product managers. Our CEO did his usual opening, partnership, innovation, shared success. Then he turned it over. Lena will be your point person on strategy going forward, he said. She's led major transformations at several global organizations. She smiled, stepped forward, and started her deck. The first 10 minutes were fine, charts, frameworks, buzzwords. Then came the part that matters. The Q&A, their head of logistics asked a question about one of the flows we'd painstakingly customized to match their regional constraints. "You're proposing we unify these decision paths," he said. "What happens to the exceptions we carved out for our South American operations?" Lena answered with confidence. "That's a great question," she said. "The system will handle it through configurable rules." We've seen that manual exceptions, while understandable, create complexity that undermines global efficiency. Jonas glanced at me. I held my face neutral. He knew that was not an answer, because he had been in the room 18 months ago when we discovered that one of those manual exceptions had prevented a catastrophic shipping bottleneck when a port closed unexpectedly. He knew the nuance. Lena did not, and she didn't notice that her non-answer had landed badly. The chief data officer asked, "The broader regulatory environment is getting stricter. How does your proposed change preserve the auditability we negotiated in Phase 2? She smiled again. "We'll ensure full transparency through logs and dashboards," she said. "Our platform is designed with compliance in mind." Another non-answer. I could see the compliance lead's jaw tight. This wasn't inexperience. This was a pattern. When someone challenged her on specifics, she reframed to the high level. Used nice words, assumed that was enough. 2 more questions, 2 more answers with no substance. Then Jonas spoke. "Karen," he said, "what's your view?" The temperature in the room changed. Lena paused. This was the moment. I could have deferred. Lena's driving the strategy now. I didn't. "Some of the unification she's proposing makes sense," I said. "But we have to preserve the exception paths that we identified with your teams, especially in South America and parts of Europe. When we ran the simulations, those exceptions saved you from major disruptions twice." I looked at Lena. "That's not just complexity," I added. "That's learned resilience." Silence. Then the head of logistics nodded. "That's my concern exactly," he said. The compliance lead spoke up. "And I need the auditability specifics we agreed on," she said. "Those weren't decoration. They were written into our regulatory commitments." Our CEO shifted in his seat. Lena's smile had become thinner. "We'll follow up with detailed models," she said quickly. "This is just an overview." Jonas leaned back. "For now," he said, "I'm going to make something clear. The primary person we look to on the technical and operational viability of these proposals is still Karen. If you change that, you need to tell us, and we reserve our rights under the agreement." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He referenced the clause, the one that made me a key person. And in that moment, I realized 2 things. Our internal org had decided I was junior enough to be a punchline. Our biggest client had decided I was senior enough to anchor a billion-dollar partnership. Those 2 perceptions were now on a collision course. You can guess what happened next. Inside our company, the narrative from some quarters became, "Karen is undermining the new director." I was. I answered exactly when asked. I corrected only when not correcting would create risk. Outside at Harcum, the narrative became, "Your new director doesn't understand enough yet. We are not comfortable expanding until she proves she does, or until you guarantee that the person who does understand will stay in place." The entire Phase 4 revenue forecast depended on that expansion, an expansion that was now stalled. Numbers in our internal forecast deck started to slip. Phase 4, originally scheduled to ramp the following quarter, got pushed out 1, then 2 quarters. Board members asked, "Why aren't we recognizing that expansion yet?" Our CFO gave careful answers. "Our client is proceeding more cautiously. Regulatory considerations. Change management." The truth was simpler. Our new director had walked into their house with the same attitude she'd walked into our atrium, with an assumption that hierarchy and confidence would be enough. Harcum had responded with, "We respect your titles. We trust the person who's been in the trenches with us for 3 years." The $1.8 billion wasn't one deal. It was the cumulative projected value of Phase 4 and the optional extension years, adjusted for probability. That projection had been baked into our strategy documents, our investor pitches, our director's own performance targets. Now it was all at risk, because one person didn't know how to treat the people who made her narrative possible. You might be thinking, okay, but did that one atrium insult really matter? Or was this all about competence? Both. Competence made the structural problem real. The insult made me unwilling to carry her. In the past, when we'd had leaders who were shaky on details but respectful, I'd done what a lot of senior ICs do. I'd brief them before client meetings. I'd quietly correct their slides. I'd stand in the back and signal when they were missing a point. I'd give them the phrases that would reassure clients. I'd be the ghostwriter behind the performance. But you don't do that for someone who publicly belittles you, then expects you to save them. You don't volunteer to be the safety net for someone who cuts the rope you're both hanging from. So after that handshake, I stopped doing unofficial backstage prep. When she asked for a quick brain dump before a call, I said, "Sure, let's schedule an hour. I'll bring materials." And I did, standard materials, nothing bespoke. When she asked, "What's the one thing I should be aware of so I don't get blindsided?" I replied, "The client already understands the system's strengths and limits. If you stay within what we've documented and don't overpromise, you'll be fine." Which was true. But I no longer translated every potential trap into a scripted line for her. I let competence or lack of it show itself, not to sabotage, to stop compensating. The impact was predictable, and it cascaded. The pivotal moment came 3 months after her arrival. Harcum's board was considering expanding our system to 2 new regions and signing an early extension on the contract, which would have locked in several more years. Our internal forecast labeled this scenario as high confidence. Revenue projection over the extension period, approximately $1.8 billion in total contract value. Our CEO, the CFO, and Lena flew out for the strategic partnership review. I did not. On purpose. "We want to show we can own this at the executive level," our CEO had said when the invite list was drawn up. "We'll bring you in for the detailed follow-ups." Jonas had asked, "Will Karen be joining?" Our CEO had answered, "We want this to be more about long-term direction than implementation. He'll be involved as needed." "That's unfortunate," Jonas had said. "He knows our reality best." The day of the meeting, I sat at my desk hundreds of miles away, watching the internal chat channel created for Harcum Strategy Review. At first, it was quiet. Then messages started to appear. Board session started. Questions on Phase 4 timelines. Regulatory lead asking specific RFP clause questions. There's a certain tone to messages typed during high-stakes meetings. Shorter, less punctuation, more ellipses. After an hour, one appeared from our CFO. "Need confirmation, clause 9.3, key personnel. Can we hand over lead architect role without client sign-off?" I didn't type anything. Within seconds, Priya from legal replied, "No, client approval required, explicit." Then a minute later, they're quoting it in the room. Another 10 minutes. Then, board asking how we can claim seamless leadership transition when contract names a specific person as critical. Then client director mentioned video. My stomach tightened. I messaged Priya privately. "What video?" I asked. She replied, "They've seen the recording from our internal event, the one with Lena's comment." Of course. Companies love to post event highlight reels on internal portals. Someone at Harcum had a friend here, or someone on our side, appalled, had shared it quietly. Either way, they'd watch their key person be dismissed as a junior employee by the new director who was now asking them to trust her with their transformation. Perception matters as much as reality. Reality. I still held the expertise. Perception from that video. The company's own leadership didn't respect or understand my position. That's what $1.8 billion looks like in practice. A boardroom where a client says, "If you don't value this person, why should we trust you with ours?" The fallout was slower than the drama of that moment suggests. Harcum didn't slam the table and scream. They did something more dangerous. They got cautious. Instead of expanding, they extended Phase 3. "Let's observe stability a bit longer," they said. Instead of signing an early extension, they said, "We'll revisit in a year. The environment is uncertain." Instead of green-lighting deeper integration, they asked, "What's our exit plan if we decide to replace Trisco?" Internally, the $1.8 billion projection didn't get crossed out in one stroke. It got trimmed, then trimmed again, then quietly moved to a low-probability scenario. Our finance team, who had already built presentations around that revenue, had to rebuild models. Our CEO had to soften his language on earnings calls. We continue to see opportunity with our largest clients, though outcomes may materialize over a longer horizon than initially anticipated. Translated, we thought we had a near-locked 1.8 billion in long-term value. We don't anymore. Inside Triscope, someone had to own that. It wasn't going to be the board. It wasn't going to be the CEO. It was going to be the director whose primary mandate had been grow strategic accounts. You can argue whether my atrium comment was dramatic. You just cost this company $1.8 billion. But in the end, that's exactly how the story read in the numbers. Because she did two things: underestimated the importance of one person to a client who had written that importance into a legal contract, revealed publicly that she didn't see that person as anything but junior. The rest was math and human nature. Here's the educational part, if you want to call it that. It's not be petty, it'll pay off. It's this. There are three kinds of power in a company. Title power, what's printed on your badge and on the org chart. Structural power, what's written in contracts, processes, and dependencies. Reputational power, who trusts you, what they've seen you do, and whether they'll follow you when things get shaky. Titles get handed out, reshuffled, and taken away. Structure gets negotiated up front, usually in rooms most employees never see. Reputation gets built quietly over years. Lena had title. I had structure and reputation. The 1.8 billion was where those last two intersected. Most people in roles like mine never get to influence structural power. We sign whatever HR gives us. We get staffed on accounts without seeing the contracts. We build reputations that benefit the company but don't get codified anywhere. That's the mistake. If you want to take anything from my story, let it be this. Whenever you can, push one step beyond reputation into structure. If you are the key reason a client stays, ask to be named in their continuity clauses, not as a vanity but as truth. If you carry systems nobody else understands, negotiate transition requirements into your role. If your absence would create real risk, make sure that risk is acknowledged somewhere other than in your manager's compliments. It doesn't mean you become irreplaceable. It means if someone wants to treat you as replaceable, they have to do it with full knowledge of the cost. As for me, I didn't stay. Once it was clear that the relationship between my structural and reputational power and the company's title decisions had diverged too far, I made a choice. When Harcum quietly started asking their own version of the question, what if Karen left Triscope? I didn't sabotage. I didn't poach. I honored my agreements, but I also listened. Today I work for a much smaller firm, fewer fancy titles, no atrium events with cameras. But on my first day, the founder said something I'll never forget. If a client ever treats you like your junior while relying on your expertise, I want to know. And if any of us ever do that, you can walk. He wasn't promising that I'd never be underestimated. He was promising that the organization wouldn't endorse it. That's the difference. So if you're listening to this as someone who doesn't look like much on an org chart but quietly holds more than people realize, remember, you don't have to explode to make a point. You just have to know where your power actually lives. Title is the loudest. It's not the strongest. Sometimes all it takes to expose that is one public moment, one smirk, one sentence. Get this junior employee out of my sight. And someone who spent years building structure looking back and saying calmly, you just cost this company $1.8 billion. Because if you've done the work, that's not a threat. It's a forecast. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.